Hello and welcome to Pop Culture Shark, the live stream about all things pop culture. I'm Final Monkey,
And I'm Caleb.
and with
I'm
us
Daniel.
today is
Yeah.
is Daniel. Yes, we'll figure out the intro one of these days. We'll get
Gotcha.
it ironed out. Cool. Yeah, we are going to be talking about Narnia again. Last month we covered the first three books, and so today we're going to cover the last four books.
This one's
Uh,
going to be interesting because the first three are the three movies, which most people know.
Mhm.
And then farthest they went, I believe, in those BBC was even Silver Chair. So even the
Yeah.
last three, most people don't know. So
Yeah.
I'm excited about this. I'm excited to hear your thoughts on. Um, so this set actually contains my new least favorite because my least favorite was Prince Caspian, and then talking to you made me find an appreciation for it. And then I'm like, oh, I think there's this one that I actually like least more than Prince Caspian. So I want to see if you can change my opinion on this one too. So
Okay.
I'm excited for it. So, but yeah, let's see. Before we do all of that, what's up, Trip and Work? Uh, let's go ahead and get into our weekend checkup. How y'all doing this week?
Pretty good. Still recovering from Christmas break. I for some reason I just keep reading books nonstop. So
Yeah.
this month or this last past week, I went to the library and got Rassel or RASL. I don't know how you pronounce it. Is by the creator of Bone, Jeff Smith. Very different from Bone. Uh, this is a kind of a sci-fi noir story where a guy is jumping between parallel universes and the government's after him. A lot of stuff about Nikolai Tesla. Very interesting. I enjoyed it. Not for children. Bone was for kids. This is not for kids.
Trying to remember Bone. See, I ran the comic book section uh, whenever I worked at Half Price Books, and
Uh-huh.
so like you'll say stuff and I'll like vaguely recognize it because I used to put it on the shelves. But I guess I remember this. Yeah.
Yeah. So Caleb, you never read Bone before?
No.
Oh my gosh, Caleb, this is like the classic. This is like, if I put out the top 10 list of, graphic novels people have to read, Bone is very close to the top of the list.
The art
It's
is definitely very interesting. It's like a mix between. Ironically, we were just talking about Steamboat Willie and a little bit of Peanuts, I guess.
Yeah, are you familiar with Pogo, the comic strip from like the what was it, 50s or 60s?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if you took that and mixed it with Lord of the Rings, you would get Bone.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to take a look at that. I've heard of it because, like I said, I worked at Half Price Books for 2.5 years. I ran the comic book section and the graphic novel section, so I've seen it a lot. I guess I just never registered to me.
Yeah, it's one of the all-time classics. Highly recommend Bone. So how about you, Daniel? How was your week?
My week's been pretty good. Uh, Unfortunately, for the sake of the podcast, no new literary adventures to report. I haven't started anything new. Mainly, I was reviewing Narnia for this conversation, which
That's
I
what,
love
yeah.
reading through. I don't get tired of the Narnia books. So, but yeah, things are going pretty good. Otherwise, so
Yeah, no, I did the same thing, and we got Tripping Work rereading it because I'm similar where I read the last four over the past week, not because like I definitely needed to um, I needed to brush up because my weakness was the first three, is that I'll get stuff confused with what happens in the movies to the books.
Mm-hmm.
And in these are just ones that I've read not as much of. I've definitely read the first three specifically. I have read dozens of times. The last four I've read maybe 3 or 4 times each, which is still a lot.
Yeah, well,
but
it's more than some people.
Yeah,
Some folks haven't even read any of them.
Oh yeah.
Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. So,
but I think this was my first time rereading them, like as an actual functioning adult who like recognizes allegory and and so like I'm reading, we'll get to it, Horseman's Boy, and I'm like, oh, that's what he was saying here. I didn't even get this when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
So
I put on the screen the Bone comics.
Yeah.
How long is Bone?
It is 9 volumes.
Okay.
We may have to. This might be a future book club, since I didn't know you had not read this. We might have to figure out a way for you to read this, Caleb.
Who's it? Who publishes it?
I think it was independent. I know Scholastic is the one who's releasing them now, but it was an indie comic.
Okay, I'll have to see if they have like maybe it's on like Comixology or something.
Or I'm sure your local library, I'm sure, has them all.
Also true. I would also have to get a library card.
Caleb.
I don't visit. What's funny is I actually don't visit the library that often. That's definitely something that I'm going to be trying to fix this year.
Are you in Jefferson County, or are you which county?
When I was in Oldham County, I went to the library a lot, and then when we moved to Jefferson County, I just never got a library book.
Jefferson County has an awesome trade paperback selection. At least they did 20 years ago when I lived there. They had
20 years ago.
They had like Alan Moore's Captain Britain and stuff you could not find anywhere. So
yeah, I'll definitely have to check it out, because like I don't think I've been to a J-Town library or a Jefferson County library probably since we moved to New Jersey, which was I was like 10 or something.
That's been a while. Yeah.
That's actually when I was a kid, I actually did used to go, and that's where I got like the old Dark Horse Clone Wars comic books, and that's how I read those.
Cool. Yeah, for our viewers at home, if you don't know, most libraries have tons and tons of comic books and graphic novels to read for free. So that's the way I read a ton of stuff. So
that's how I read a lot of the like the essentials. Like before I actually started purchasing them on myself, that's how I read like Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen and Long Halloween and now. So,
Long Halloween.
I love Long Halloween.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
All right, so we ready to hop back into Narnia?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay, so tonight we'll be covering the last 4 books: Silver Chair, Horse and His Boy, Magician's Nephew, and The Last Battle.
Okay.
As many of you know, this is my first journey into Narnia, so all this is brand new to me. I read this probably it's always been a month ago now as I read this, so I might have some details mixed up in my head, but that's what Caleb and Daniel are here for, to keep it straight. So let's see, Silver Chair. This is the return of Eustace and Polly. No, not Polly. Jill. Jill. As they are brought back to Narnia on a quest to find Prince Caspian's son, who is missing.
Yep. Right. So this is actually Jill's first time into Narnia.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Which I'd forgotten. She takes it rather well, actually.
Yeah, there's not much adaptation or getting used to the world of Narnia for her. A little bit, I guess, at the very beginning when she meets. Are we doing spoilers?
Oh
Yes.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Full
When she meets
spoilers.
Aslan, for those who haven't read the book, I'm sorry. But when she meets Aslan at the beginning, it's kind of a real quick, thrust into like trial by fire or baptism by fire almost. Uh, First getting used to the fact she's in a different world, and then also getting the responsibility of the signs and being sent on this mission behind Eustace, who, she caused to fall over the edge of the mountain, and then Aslan
Mhm.
blows him to Narnia. But I wanted to touch on something that Aaron said earlier, mixing up her with Polly Plummer.
Oh
This is
yeah.
one of the books that seems to very, very similarly mirror The Magician's Nephew, in that we have two kids who come to Narnia by it's a very similar setup, just in terms of like the number of kids and also just the experience that they have in Narnia, like
Mhm.
thrust into by magic this other world and being given a task and responsibility similar to what we see in the Magician's Nephew with um, Diggory and Polly. So
Yeah, definitely.
yeah.
Um, Main thing that I noticed initially, because like I said, this is my first time reading through these as an adult who can recognize allegory and whatnot.
Yeah.
Uh, I wanted to go in and try to figure out kind of, because you've got each individual uh, friend of Narnia who, whenever they're first introduced to Narnia, there is a different reason for them to start believing.
Hmm.
And so, like, you've got Lucy, who is the child, faith like a child. Uh, Susan is the skeptic. Peter and Susan are skeptics. The way that I noticed Jill is she's kind of like the one who's kind of like rock bottom, to the point where she needs Aslan, she needs Narnia.
Mm.
Kind of like I'm trying to figure out how to word it. You know how like there are people who find God
Hmm.
through their hard troubles, and so they're actually more receptive to the idea, because
Sure.
to be honest, at this point they're desperate to believe in something.
Yeah.
uh, and so that's kind of how I found Jill. I also thought Jill kind of had a woman at the well moment
Hmm.
uh, with
Very
Aslan.
much so. Very
Uh,
much so. Yeah.
and they just cap it off with she's drinking this water and she's like, I feel like I'll never be thirsty again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's as far as Jill I think is a very fun character and a very interesting. I don't want to call her a sidekick, but like at this point, we're used to Eustace more, so she's kind of the sidekick. But at the same time, Eustace was kind of the sidekick to Edmund and Lucy in the last book. So,
Right.
but yeah, I definitely enjoy her. Um,
Oh yeah.
Especially in this one, I don't think she gets as much to do in the last battle, but in the last battle is less about the friends anyways.
Yeah.
Right.
So Aslan gives her four signs to look for, and this part of the book kind of annoyed me, as to how she kept missing the signs or ignoring the signs. And but I guess that's part of being human, is we're told
Mhm.
something to do and we do not follow instructions.
Mm-hmm.
And so that got a little annoying for me. You know, my other question was, at the beginning. There's like an owl and a group of owls that lead them astray at the beginning. Were these just supposed to just be nosy owls that were just giving bad advice, or were these owls like evil? Or I couldn't figure out what to make of the owls at the beginning.
I took them as just owls that didn't know what they were doing,
like busybodies that were just giving bad advice. And okay, because they're like, oh yeah, don't tell anybody, don't tell I can't remember the guy's name now, but they were like, yeah, don't tell anybody, let's ignore that. And
is it Trumpkin the dwarf?
Trumpkin, yes.
I might have my dwarves mixed up, but I think it's Trumpkin. Yeah,
it was Trumpkin.
Yeah.
Lord Regent Trumpkin,
Yes.
who needs to get out his little trumpet to hear.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they go on an adventure, and I know that there's a lot of trials they have to overcome. This one I read, it's been over a month ago, so details are a little blurry in my brain, but I know eventually they do find, is it Regal? What's the kid's name they're looking for? Rillian. And he is tied to a chair, and he's told that he goes mad every so many hours, and if they release him, he'll turn into a serpent and attack them and all this stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
they find out that the chair is basically cursed and is making them do all this stuff, and so they destroy the chair. And then the is it the Green Witch or the Green Lady or something?
The Green Lady of Curdle.
Yes.
Yeah. She turns into the serpent.
Mm-hmm.
So here we have again the imagery of, in the Bible, the devil is a serpent. We have the Green Lady turning into a serpent. Again, hearkening back to that. Any comments on this part?
So not only is he tied to the chair, he's actually the Green Lady's kind of right hand.
Yes, the knight that she rides with. Yes,
right, exactly. Now, the reason that he was lost is because the reason that he was lost is because a giant serpent killed his mother, Ramandu's daughter, who Ramandu was, someone that we met in the previous book. And then Caspian ends up marrying his daughter, and that's how we have Rillian. Serpent comes in, kills Ramandu's daughter. Rillian goes out for vengeance, essentially. And so whenever she finally gets him to sit down in the silver chair to just kind of brainwash him, that's how Lady in the Green Kirtle is going to take over Narnia. Now, what I wanted to bring up, because do you think, and this is for the panel, do you think that the Lady of the Green Kirtle is of the same cut of the White Witch, or do you think she is a reincarnation of the White Witch?
It's a great question. And I don't want to cut you off, Aaron, but I'll jump in here, I guess. So there's a scene in Prince Caspian where it is very strongly implied that there's a means by which the witch can reincarnate. And that's when they are hiding from Miraz's army, and they are advised by, I'm trying to remember now, one of the dwarves and apparently a witch and a werewolf who are there with them.
Right.
I'm forgetting how they get into the camp, but they're there. And they advise the children, they advise the Pevensies, they advise Peter and Susan and Lucy to, and Caspian who's with them, to reconjure the witch by sacrificing blood, human blood specifically. Now, I'm trying to recall in the story if it's clear whether the blood needed to be from them specifically or if it was just human blood in general. But it seems to be the case that to just sort of like taking the field. It's possible that the witch could have been reincarnated if there is some sort of a loophole, so to speak, in her coming back that's alluded to again in Prince Caspian.
Okay.
I definitely see her as a continuation of this sort of standard that Lewis has through the books of the evil presentation of witchcraft or of sorcery or devilry in his books. And it could be simply that he's using a similar archetype because it worked well with one book and he sort of wants to just kind of keep the image consistent with the reader. But then again, the other is possible as well. So I'm not really sure. I know that in Narnia, in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Mr. Beaver specifically references that Jadis is part jinn and part giant.
Right.
So she's described as a hybrid creature. I don't know if that is, and she's from Charn, originally from another world.
That's the next thing I was going to bring up is, you take into account what you get from Magician's Nephew.
Yeah.
If Great Lady of the Green Kirtle is not a reincarnation of the White Witch, is she also a survivor of Charn?
Right.
So could the blood sacrifice have been Caspian's wife? And wasn't she had an interesting hair because she was the child of the star people or whatever. I can't remember what it was now. And
yeah, because Ramondu's a star, or I guess you could, using the biblical imagery, it'd be an angel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because stars and angels are usually used interchangeably in scripture to refer to each other.
So,
but definitely some sort of a celestial being, we'll say. But having a human body, right? Humanoid type presence.
So that would be a major blood sacrifice, her death to possibly bring her back. So I mean,
right.
None of that's in the books, but that's us connecting dots, and in my head that makes sense. So, interesting. Let's see what else. So they have a lot of adventures underground trying to get back to Narnia, and at the end, Caspian returns as an old man. And I believe he dies, and Aslan resurrects him at the end. It's been a while, like I said, since I've read this, but yeah. So I enjoyed this book. It's just I was telling my son earlier today, I read so much stuff that everything starts running together in my head, and I'm like, okay, wait, which book was that?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I would say, out of ranking, this one might be my third favorite. I'm thinking. Okay. My first favorite being, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I love it. And then Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And then this one, of course, this one actually might, the more I read it, because like I said, I've read, those two way more than I've read this one. So this one might climb the ranks the more I read this. Tripping Orc posits an interesting question. What if the White Witch was pregnant when she came to Narnia? That is also an interesting one. That the Lady of the Green Kirtle is of the kin.
Is her daughter, right?
That is an interesting question. I like that. That's the interesting thing. Is we've at this point we've posited 3 possibilities, and I could see any of them. If there was a witch in the last battle, I would 100% say that they're all reincarnations of Jadis the White Witch. But because there's only 2 of them,
right?
That's where I'm like, oh, are they the same? Because if there's 3 of them, rule of 3, I can get on board with that.
Sure.
But 2 of them, not as much. But yeah. So, Aaron, whenever you, Final Monkey, whenever you whenever we were talking last time, I believe you said that this one was your favorite, possibly due to recency bias. Now that we're kind of far and away from that, and you've read all 7 of them, is that still the case with this one?
I still have recency bias. I really enjoyed Magician's Nephew and Last Battle, so it's hard for me to say. I need to get some distance and maybe revisit them at another date.
Okay.
I We'll get to Magician's Nephew. I really enjoyed that one. I like world building. I'm kind of discovering that since I'm reading this as an adult, I don't really get caught up in the kids' adventures as much because I'm like, oh, she's these kids just having an adventure, whatever. I'm a cranky old man. Um, but I really like the world building and figuring out how everything works and stuff. So I think that's why I really enjoyed Magician's Nephew. And Magician's Nephew was a little bit sillier. They didn't quite take itself as serious.
Yeah.
When the White Witch is running around London and all that.
Yeah. And you know what, like you said, we will get to Magician's Nephew. I do find it interesting that whenever we were first started talking about Narnia back in I think it was October, November, read it. You said that you had tried it at one point, and you tried it in publication order.
Yeah, I tried to read Magician's Nephew years and years ago, and I could not get into it. So it was very different this time because I had context from the other books. I was able to get into Magician's Nephew way easier. So yeah, do not definitely read it publication order. Do not read it the way the publisher suggests now. Starting with Magician's Nephew,
that's not just the way that. That's not just the way that the publisher. That's actually what Lewis said, and I'm like, no, sorry, man, you're wrong. So
it would be like, bring up Star Wars. Start with the prequels. I do not recommend that. Do at least do Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, and then you can go back and watch the prequels, and then jump back to Return of the Jedi. It flows better.
I think a better way to posit that is actually say starting off with the Silmarillion in the Legendarium, because it's almost like you're just thrown into this world and you're not getting any context for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, even Orc says that wardrobe is the introduction to Narnia. Yeah, whenever you read Magician's Nephew, you're not really introduced to anything.
Yeah, because you read Magician's Nephew, it's like, oh, Jadis is back, and if you don't have that context, it's
right.
Oh, I don't care who this person is.
Did we even know her name before Magician's Nephew?
That I do not know.
I think Jadis. I think her name is used again by Mr. Beaver in the description of her. I could be wrong about that, but I want to say he does call her Jadis.
Okay.
And oh no! It's even before that when they get to. So when the four Pevensies get into Narnia, and they go to Mr. Tumnus's house, and they read the letter from Mulgrim, Captain of the Secret Police, he signs it Jadis, Empress of the Lone Islands, Queen of Narnia.
Okay. Gotcha.
So yeah, so we have her name. Yep.
Cool. All right, so we're skipping over Horsten's Boy, so let's talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought this book was fun. I don't know if it's necessary to the overall narrative. It didn't connect as much as the other 6 books. This is almost like a side quest. Oh, here's his story.
Kind of. I mean, it does introduce you to, and I just found this out recently, so bear with me because I have always called them Calormenes. I've always called it Calormen.
Mm-hmm.
Because I thought he was doing something with it. It was like Calormenes, Calormenes. They're the bad guys. They kind of rhyme. I found out recently that it's actually Calormen. So yeah, so I'm going to try to say it the right way.
Right.
But if I slip up, forgive me. But yeah, this one definitely introduces you to the Calormen, and kind of because if you skip over this and you just read the last battle, they just kind of come out of nowhere. I
Yeah.
think they're just mentioned in Silver Chair maybe like once or twice, and then that would be like all you get of them, and then they're just like essentially the enemy faction, I guess. But another interesting thing about this book, and I see the comment about that as well. This is the only book that is not really isekai, which is not about someone entering the world of Narnia. It's about Narnia itself. So this one is definitely the most unique out of the most unique out of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I can't necessarily say if I respect it for trying to be different. I do enjoy the outsiders going into Narnia more though.
Mm-hmm.
I like this story, but I also feel like I've heard this story before. It was a lot of tropes that I've seen before. So we followed the character Shasta, I think is his name.
Shasta.
And we by the end of the story we find out he has a twin and he's royalty and stuff. And Wizard of Oz did a similar story in one of the sequels. I think it was maybe Return to Oz or Marvelous Land of Oz, where we're following a boy named Tip, and at the end we find out it's really a girl that Mombi has switched and changed her form and all this stuff. Like Prince and the Pauper or Man in the Iron Mask. These are tropes we see a lot. So that was playing in my head like, okay, yeah, I've seen this before. But all stories are copying each other, so that's normal.
Every song is just a ripoff of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star.
Pretty much.
That's what I always say. I think this one is a little bit different though, because it is that, but that's just a vehicle for the message that is trying to posit, which is what's the word? It starts with a D. Divine providence, I believe is what it is. Which is, everything, even the bad things, happen for the good. And so like nothing would have happened the way it did had Shasta or Kor, I believe is Shasta's real name, had not been kidnapped.
Right.
And so it's really not about like Shasta discovering that he's royalty. It's more like Shasta discovering that his kidnapping was for the greater good.
It's very much the story of Daniel from the Bible, him sold into slavery, and it's all for a greater purpose by the end.
It's Jonathan. No, not Jonathan. Joseph.
What did I say, Daniel? I meant Joseph. What?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's been a long day. Yeah,
that's all right.
Yes, I did mean Joseph. Yeah, sold into slavery. Yeah. You're probably thinking, when was Daniel sold into slavery? Yeah,
I was just going with it. I was like, wow.
I mean, you could make an argument that was the case, although it was the circumstances were different. But yes, you could, in a general kind of way, you could say that. So, when they all got sent off to Babylon in the exile.
Yeah, but Joseph, if you don't sell him into slavery, if he doesn't get taken to Egypt, if he doesn't have the vision about the food, if he doesn't save the food, everybody starves to death. It's all big chain of events. So all the bad stuff has to happen for the good stuff to happen.
Right.
And so in this story, I can't remember the girl's name.
Aravis.
Yeah, there's parts where like they hear lions chasing them and stuff, and it's you see that Aslan is guiding them to where they need to be throughout the whole book.
Did you get a sense of Shasta and Aravis's age? Because I couldn't tell if they were like children or adults.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking like 12-year-old. I had no idea. I was thinking pretty young.
Well, because Aravis is a noblewoman.
Mm-hmm. I think part of the confusion on that is, without trying to be too long-winded, this is kind of Lewis's nod to, a multicultural world where Narnia definitely functions as a reflection of Britain, not just with the imagery of the, the satyrs or the all the mythological characters that are very present in like British folklore and things like that, but then also the monarchy and all those things. In fact, when they first kind of taken a little bit from Magician, we're not there yet, but Magician's Nephew, when they first get there, the cabbie who becomes the first king, that's how you have sort of an idea of English being spoken, and also of like, accents like Scottish or English being commonplace in Britain as a consequence of that injection that Aslan makes at the very beginning of the story. But in the case of Horse and His Boy, it's this nod to the Orient and the East. And it's this secondary world. And this is one of the reasons I love it so much, is that I think it's very easy to over psychoanalyze the story as all just a perception on the part of the kids. I think even some people have done that, where they're saying, well, this is, all from the Pevensies' perspective, or from, Eustace and Jill's perspective. But because of Shasta and because of his story, we know that that's not the case. This is a real world in the parameters that, Lewis is writing, that has an ongoing life of its own outside of our world. Aside from the narrative of the Pevensies, that you have Shasta who grows up with the fishermen, has a life of experiences cleaning nets, and in some cases being beaten because he didn't do the job right. All of that is real for him, and he then is providentially brought into the story of the Pevensey kids when he's introduced to the Narnian lords, and the fact that he's actually related to them. So as far as their age is concerned, I think part of the confusion comes is that Aravis is running away from betrothal. And we typically in Western culture associate that in the East with being very young or below what we would consider to be the age of consent. So we kind of like make a jump, like sort of presumptuously, that, okay, well, they must be very young, maybe because it's an Eastern culture or it's different than Western culture. I think probably teenagers to young adults is a fine. I think you can make just as well an argument. I don't think there's enough data in the story to make that clear, although it's definitely strongly re-emphasized that Shasta is very young, that Aravis is very young. So it's kind of hard. And even the language that Bree uses, Tarkina, the female Tarkin, but also almost kind of this like grammatically implying like a young lady, or even younger than that, maybe. It just creates difficulty in being able to pin that down. But I don't think it's as set in stone. I think it's possible they could have been, like you said, 12 or so. But it's possible they could have been a little bit older, maybe 14 or 15, even 16 or 17, possibly, depending on, and because the Shasta's an experience, which is pointed out by Bree at the beginning when he's trying to learn how to ride for the first time, is mainly due to the fact that Shasta has never had experience with a horse, let alone a war horse, a professional riding animal of any kind, right? When he talks about, well, I've ridden the donkey or whatever, and Bree almost vomits. He's like, what did you say? And so I guess I think it's the inexperience there might lend itself to the fact that he's young, but it also might just lend itself to the fact that he's maybe a little bit older than we think. But he again hasn't had a whole lot of life experience because he's been living with his uncle the entirety of his life, and not being allowed to stray very far, it seems, either. Right? Like his uncle goes to the market to sell fish, but Shasta pretty much stays at the cottage and does what he's told all the time. And that's why he's always having these, daydreams about going north or what's over the horizon, because he doesn't get to go anywhere. So,
yeah, I guess just the title alone, A Horse and His Boy. I'm thinking he's
right,
he's
correct. Yeah,
pretty young, and with Aravis, or whatever her name is,
right.
she describes the one that she's betrothed to as very old, and so I'm thinking she's 13, 14. I'm thinking this is a very young arranged marriage, so that's how I pictured it in my head, but
no, sure, yeah,
could be wrong.
Yeah.
Speaking of Brie, I was I was doing some research on like some like trivia for this, and I always love like how the Inklings would affect each other's work. For those who don't know, the Inklings being the club that Lewis and Tolkien were a part of, to just talk about literature and whatnot. The the town that the hobbits stop in, where they eventually meet Aragorn for the first time,
right,
is called Bree, and they stay at the inn called the Prancing Pony.
right.
So
yeah.
I just want to throw that there. I really enjoy that. I'd love for someone to like make a video, and they'd have to be more knowledgeable in the Legendarium than me, because I don't know as much about that. But just like, here's every connection between Narnia and Middle Earth.
Right.
I think that'd be very interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as the kids, I definitely think, because I guess I was either thinking like, oh, they're either kids like the Peveseys were, or they're adults. I guess they were probably more Caspian's age, I guess, because I always pictured Caspian as like the oldest of the five in Prince Caspian, and probably an adult by the time we get to Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So
right.
So yeah, definitely. Oh, we didn't mention this with Silver Chair. What did y'all think? Because I find it really fun, but also sad. What did y'all think of Old Man Caspian?
Oh yeah. Well, it's I mean, definitely sad in what he experienced, what he went through. I mean, because by the time we get to the story, or we see Jill and Eustace seeing him, and he's leaving to go find out, who should take care of Narnia, because he's lost his son, and his wife is dead, and he, just a really, I mean, it's a real downer, to say the least. Like, coming from where we just were with Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and he's young, and he's, excited, and he's going out to find the lost nobles or lost lords. He gets married. Like, there's all these ups. There's all these wonderful victories, so to speak. And then seeing him at the end of his life like that. And I think probably, in my mind, that's part of the redemptive clause of why Lewis wrote in this resurrection story at the very end. That it almost seems like what Lewis is doing is he's overemphasizing the negative part of Caspian's life coming to the end of existence, and he's going to die, and everyone he loves is gone. And then Aslan is there to redeem all that by bringing him back to life. Yeah. And bringing him back to life by shedding his blood. So very powerful biblical imagery there. And of course, when he resurrects him, he's not resurrected to old, stay. He's young again.
Yeah.
Youthful and vibrant, and yeah. So
you've also got Eustace, he saw Prince Caspian as young, and next time he sees him, he's old. So he's missed this huge chunk of Prince Caspian's life. It's very similar to Avatar: The Last Airbender. When Aang is frozen in ice, he comes back to see his friend Boomy and King Boomy, and now he's an old man.
Yeah.
And so there's this tragedy of, oh, we could have had all these adventures together, and I missed out.
Yeah, I didn't even make the Narnia and the Narnia Avatar connection. That's actually a very interesting one. I like that.
Yeah.
Overall thoughts on Horse and His Boy. This one is probably number 5 for me as far as favorites, which is not that's not bad by any means. It's just that the 4 ahead of it, I think, are so fantastic. But like I was saying, talking with you guys has made me find an appreciation for this, because with this being the only one that doesn't have people coming in to Narnia, I was always like, that doesn't make it as relatable, but it kind of enhances the other ones, though, because it makes Narnia a real place where people actually live and grow up. So that's not something that I had ever really thought. So this conversation has already immediately made me love this book even more, because I'd never thought of that perspective.
Awesome.
So let's move on to The Magician's Nephew. This one, we go back to the beginning of the story, basically, and it's Diggory and Polly, and I believe it's Diggory's uncle,
Uncle Andrew.
Yeah, he turns out that he's dabbling in dark arts.
Yes.
And he has a green ring and a yellow ring. And I noticed this book has a lot to do with temptations. At the beginning, Jill's tempted to get the ring. Later, we'll see that I call her Jill. Polly is tempted to get the ring, and then later, Diggory is tempted to ring the bell that brings back Jadis.
Yep.
So throughout this book, this is very much relates back to the Garden of Eden. We see a lot of Garden of Eden imagery in the story. But one of the recurring themes that I saw was temptation all throughout the book, and how both of them fall into temptation at different times.
Yeah.
When you got the desperation of Diggory's sick mother as well.
Mm-hmm.
So this book also introduces the multiverse, basically.
Yes.
What does C.S. Lewis call it? The wood between the worlds.
Wood between the worlds.
Yep.
That's it.
So I'm just gonna get off on a little tangent here. How lazy was it for Star Wars to call their version the world between worlds? And they even acknowledged it with the Ahsoka episode recently, calling it the Lion, the Witch, and the Jedi, or whatever they called it. It's very. I just found that very lazy. I don't care if you do multiverse and these doorways, but at least try to make it somewhat different.
The Jedi, the Witch, and the Warlord. That's what it was.
Yeah. I don't
know.
Yeah.
There's definitely obvious connections there.
And I guess they could. I mean, you could get away with it, but it's like, oh well, Disney made the Narnia movies. They own Star Wars. They could do whatever, I guess. But
it's in part the fact they own it, as far as the legality is concerned. But I really think it's a homage to the fact that Tolkien and Lewis are really the pillars of fantasy literature.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
You can't get away from that, and I think that the writer's ability to be self-aware and transparent about that. Yeah. Like, we're totally stealing this from a guy who wrote much better than what than what we're producing for you to see and watch.
And you even see it at the beginning of like Nightmare Before Christmas, where it's the forest of all the different doors with the holidays and stuff. And,
exactly. Yeah.
Well, I even think that there's references, and this is just something that I thought of just off the top of my head.
Mm.
The more you read into Stephen King's Dark Tower series and Desperation and Regulators, I think there's a lot of connections to the Wood Between Worlds in Stephen King as well. And you know, Stephen King also kind of being one of those pillars, but much later.
Yeah.
So even he's getting from this.
100%. Absolutely. Whenever I watch or I see media that represents ideas about like interspatial or interdimensional travel, things that deal with like space-time or relativity, Interstellar being a great example of that.
Oh yes.
Right? Where you've got the main character is off in this dimensional loop where he's unbounded by time, so he can communicate with his daughter before she's, his age. Every time I see stuff like that, I'm always thinking back to Lewis, and specifically the conversation he records in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, who we learn now is Diggory, the young boy grown up to be a professor. And he makes the point that if there is such a thing as other worlds, then there's no reason to think that the time in those worlds would be the same as ours. And it was for me as a kid, before I ever got into studies with regards to like higher mathematics and stuff, it was a really great introduction to the idea of relativity. Was something that Lewis was kind of alluding to in a more supernatural than in a scientific way, but giving sort of a framework for what that means, that there can be not only other worlds, but other timelines, other, occurrences that are either overlapped by our own or overlap ours. And that allows then the Pevensies to be able to grow up an entire, lifelong experience of being kings and queens of Narnia. And then the moment they come back through the wardrobe, they're all kids again. So to me, whenever I see that stuff in science fiction or anything, there's kind of a glimmer in my eye because I'm thinking back to Lewis and Tolkien and all the ideas they were in maybe a less sophisticated way, you could say, but they were still playing with those ideas as concepts. And I really, I enjoy seeing that reprised because I don't think those things are as new as we think. I think those are older ideas. I think we have more, like I said, more sophisticated ways of talking about them. But I think those are consistent ideas across literature and definitely in fantasy, which Lewis and Tolkien helped to sort of like, that was the world that they shaped for the 21st century.
I'm a big fan of, when I'm reading stories, final battles, like these huge final battles, like like Infinity Gauntlet in Marvel Comics, or
Yep.
That's just my jam. And this story has like references to one where we get to the land of Shar and we see like here's the fallout of this major battle that destroyed everything. And I guess Jadis is waiting for someone to free her.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jadis is freed, and she follows them back to London, and she's hoping to conquer London and finds out she has no powers. And then we just get this goofy nonsense of her and Andrew trying to go on a quest to conquer London.
So fun.
Yeah. Oh, I loved it. Yeah, it was. I like I said, I really enjoyed this book, just the silliness of it, and how it just kept building and building, getting more and more silly. Every time you saw Jadis again in London, it was funny.
I think that's one of my favorite lines from the book. I can't remember if it's Diggory or Polly. It says, "She's loose in London."
Yeah.
Like when you walk out the door, it just starts making mayhem everywhere.
Yeah,
that's so good.
Yeah. And then we also we meet the cab driver and his horse. I think the horse's name was Strawberry.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And they end up getting trapped in Narnia as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I really liked watching the creation of Narnia. Just Aslan singing everything into existence. And then if you look at the Bible, it says in the beginning God was the Word, and the Word was God. So it makes sense that it's a song that him just singing everything into creation. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I really enjoyed that, and yeah, I just really liked this book. I don't know, it was silly, more lighthearted, and just the world building I really enjoyed.
Another thing that I found that was very interesting. So there's the idea of the deplorable word, which it's like a curse that is placed upon a world. It kind of reminded me of which I'm sure J.K. Rowling was getting from this was the three what they call unforgivable unforgivable curses in Harry Potter. I think is what they were called.
Right.
So I was very much reminded of that with the deplorable word, which
right, and certainly the death curse, right?
Yes.
Like there's a number of different references that are analogous or seem similar to what's going on in Charn with Jadis. There's actually a lot of crossover with Harry Potter. Of course, I don't know. I'm sure you've probably seen the fan theories about the four Pevensies being the four founders of Hogwarts.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I have not seen that. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. So there's
I'll send that to you.
that's a wild little ride to take. But one thing that was reading back through Magician's Nephew that's apparent is the concept of magic as a bloodline, which is an idea that Harry Potter makes, right, with the Mudbloods, and then the pure blood wizards and all that. That's a concept that seems to be the case in Magician's Nephew as well, because when Jadis overlooks Diggory, she says, you're not a wizard. You don't have the look of it. There's something about Diggory's physical appearance that makes it clear to her he's not magical. So even in these early pages, there's this idea of sort of like, again, an inherited sort of genealogy of magic, which I find intriguing between the two books. Not that they have anything to do with one another, but that both Harry Potter and the Narnia books both sort of give support to this idea of magic not just being an issue of the words that you speak, but of your blood. And then, of course, Mr. Beaver later on talking about Jadis having a very unique bloodline, right? Being half Jinn and half giant and all this. But yeah, the Charn story, along with the story of creation, Aslan creating the world, and sort of the Genesis kind of story, does seem to me to sort of mirror the idea of the original fall, sort of the angelic rebellion, Satan's fall, Lucifer's fall, and then later coming to the creation of the world, of our world, being symbolically through Narnia. And God, again, as Aaron said, speaking things into existence by singing, by using language and sound and all that. And another thing that kind of stuck out to me as I was sort of reflecting on it was, so in the Gospels, there's this idea that Jesus talks about those who, to whom much is given, much is required, and the one who is faithful with a little will be given more, blessed with higher responsibility. And you see that in the life of the cabbie and Strawberry. Is you have this guy who is, being a faithful cabbie in London, doing his job, taking care of things, probably doesn't get paid a lot, probably doesn't make a lot of money, but he's a faithful, good, solid person. And he and his wife are inaugurated by Aslan to be the first king and queen of Narnia in this new world, this new created world that they're going to live in forever. So there was a kind of a sort of an inkling of this idea that we see in the Gospels and in the New Testament of heaven being a place where those who have been faithful is where reward is given to demonstrate God's faithfulness for obedience and for doing what we're supposed to do. So that's an interesting sort of thing I see. And the reason it's intriguing is because it happens in the creation narrative, not in the last battle, but at the end. right? It's this beginning story. But from the cabbie's perspective, it is sort of a new heavens and earth, because it's a new created world that he and his wife and his horse get to inhabit. And Strawberry, of course, with its wings, right? Same thing, that the horse was a good horse. I think the cab even makes that point about Strawberry, what a good horse he is in London, in their world, in our world. And then God, Aslan, as Lord, inaugurates him to this higher status of being given wings so that he can now fly and go wherever he needs to go. So,
you see, this is what I'm talking about, because it was Magician's Nephew, which is the one that I'm like, maybe I do like Caspian more than Magician's Nephew. Because right. Magician's Nephew is just, I think it's such a weird book, and there's a lot going on, and I guess, like, for me, it's hard to kind of like keep it all consolidated.
Sure.
But like I said, just having these conversations gives me an appreciation for it.
Yeah.
We also.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Caleb. Go ahead.
I was gonna go off topic, so I'll keep mine in mind. But if yours is closer.
Okay. This book also starts setting up the last battle at the end, where Diggory is sent to go get an apple, and when they bring it back, they plant the forest, and he says, as long as this forest stands, the White Witch's forces will not prevail. And we're going to see later in the last battle that the forest is destroyed. And so the protection is being removed. So
that's why it's also good to not read this one first. Read it before, like right before the last battle, because that's kind of how it's expected to be read. It's kind of close to what you were saying. Is kind of close. What I was going to bring up was, do you think that Strawberry has any connection to other horses that we have, like Bree or Jewel, who's actually Unicorn? Like there's in anything else, it would seem contrived that like every horse is related, but in something like Narnia, I wouldn't be surprised if this good horse from Earth is actually connected to some of the other heroes that we go on to read about.
Right. I do think that's entirely possible. There's another concept, and this is one of the reasons that I love the Magician's Nephew, and I also love the Horseman's Boy, because there are connections that are being made all through the story that sort of come up later. They sort of get planted as seeds, and then they sprout and grow in other books. There is a line when Arvis is talking about her, she's telling her story. So this is after the lions have been chasing them down, they get away, and she's explaining to Shasta and Bree and Hwyn, who's listening, where she came from and why she's on the run. And she references her father's line as being descended from a right line from the god Tash. And from that one line alone, there seems to be, now you could say, well, this is a belief that the Calormans have, right? Maybe it's not justified, maybe it's not really what happened, but it seems to be that it could very well be that you have this kind of spliced, maybe I could say, for lack of a better way of saying this, hybrid lineage, where Strawberry could be giving birth to horses or unicorns or something of the equestrian variety that they don't come out looking the same as him, but they are descended from him. This sort of, from God creates the world and creates the creatures, and the creatures mirror him, although they're not exactly like him. So I think that's possible, that it could be that there is a lineage connection. Certainly lineages and bloodlines that's a big succession is a big part of the Narnia stories. That was a common trope both with Lewis and with Tolkien. who emphasized the Dunedain and this idea of the bloodlines from which the heroes descend, and how their ancestors were these mighty people or mighty men who did incredible things. So I think that's entirely possible. I don't know if it's maybe expressly the idea or explicitly, but I think it's implicit.
No, it's definitely not something that's expressly that's just more of something that I thought of.
Sure.
Because,
yeah.
I mean, what's one of the most famous chapters in the Bible itself is the genealogy of Jesus.
Right. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. And so I think that has a major role in the story in making those connections. Even the idea of something giving birth to something that we wouldn't consider to be natural, maybe, but like in the case of the lamppost, right? The rod that gets planted in the ground, and because the magic is still active, it yields a lamppost. It grows into a lamppost. So there's all kinds of strange things that are happening because of the way that Aslan creates Narnia, and I think that that's entirely plausible. It does seem to be the case that there's good reason to think that could be the case in terms of lineage and descendancy and all those things. So
let's move on to the last battle.
Okay.
It starts out.
You just got done telling us that you love stuff like the Infinity Gauntlet and other final battles. So I assume that this one is a treat for you then.
Yeah, I was very excited because the book I was reading, the cover had the unicorn with blood all over his horn. I was like, okay, what's going to happen here? So yeah, it starts very differently though. We are introduced to a monkey and a donkey. And if you know me, I'm a huge fan of monkeys. I think they're hilarious. So right away it had my interest. So this is it, which one's which? Shift the monkey and Puzzle the donkey, or am I have it backwards?
Yes. So the way to remember it is Shift is very shifty.
Yes.
Okay.
Very, he's not subtle about it.
Yeah.
And Puzzle is puzzled.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah. This is they find a dead lion, and they take the skin and they put it on the donkey, and now they have a fake Aslan running around. This is, of course, very much Antichrist imagery going on here.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, very much Antichrist imagery. I forgot what I was about to say there. But yeah, so this is definitely mirroring a little bit of Revelations as we get into this.
Mm-hmm.
And we start our focus on his name Tyrion or what's his name?
Tyrion, yes,
King Tyrion and Jewel the Unicorn. And something crazy is happening. The forest is being chopped down by the animals, and they don't know why. And they spot the Calorman, or I believe is what they're called. Calorman, and in their haste, the king kills one of them, and then they think they've done something grievous, so they kind of go on the run for a little bit. Then they turn themselves in, and because they're told that Aslan told them all to be doing this,
right?
Yeah. And then another thing to bring up is Shift is also, not only is he presenting a false Aslan, but he's also saying, hey, Aslan and Tash are actually the same person.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is crazy because I read, I was reading Immortal Hulk recently, Marvel comic.
Uh-huh.
And there's a character in Marvel Comics known as the One Above All. which he's hardly referenced, but he's supposed to be the god of the Marvel universe. Once you get to the end of everything, he is God. And at the end of Immortal Hulk, he goes to confront the one below all and finds out that it's the one above all, that they're mirror images of each other, like they're the same being.
Yeah.
And it's very much what Aslan is saying here, this false teaching that, that God and devil are buddies, so I found that interesting.
Or the same coin kind of idea.
Yeah. So just interesting that Marvel Comics was doing the same thing.
Well, I mean, it's very much a if you look at anything science fiction and then you read John Carter of Mars, you're like, everything's getting it from John Carter. So it's very, very much the same thing.
That's funny.
I remember I was going to say now, this story reminds me a lot of Animal Farm. Where the animals are all being misled by clever animals, and they're being deceived, and how easy it is to control the different animals. I don't know which was written first, this or Animal Farm, but it was very similar.
I would want to say Animal Farm was first.
I believe so. So I did notice that also. So Tyrion they're in a lot of trouble, so they ask Aslan for help, and we see a vision of what are they, the Pensieve kids? Is that what they're called, the Pensieves? We see a vision of them like at a dinner table, Peter and everybody.
Right.
Pensies.
Yes, I'm sorry, yes. And I kept counting the people in the room. I couldn't figure out, because the number didn't add up. No matter who I put in there, whatever, I think it's like 7 people at the table or whatever. And, you find out later that Susan is not at the table.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So, because when that scene happened, I was like, oh, that's Peter and all them. I'm like, wait. And so I kept going, okay, is it is the professor there? Is Paulie there? I kept trying to add it up, and I was like, something's not right here.
So that's the question that I keep positing, which we've talked about this plenty of times before, and I'm sure it'll come up during the discussion, which is, was Susan done dirty? Right. I don't think so, because there's definitely a message to be sent there as well.
But I read a lot about Susan, different authors' opinions, like J.K. Rowling. She was like, oh, she discovered boys, so she doesn't want to go to Aslan now, and all this stupid stuff. And I guess that's partially true, but I took it as Susan as a reflection of, if we're looking at the Christian faith, she's a reflection of someone who grew up in church. She knows all the stories. She knows everything, but now she's decided to go a different path. Now that she is old enough to make her own decisions, she's gone away from the church. Now, maybe one day she'll return to the church. We don't know. But as of right now, she's on a different path, and that's why she's not with the others. She is a potential prodigal son, prodigal daughter type situation, is the way I took it. So I don't think she was done dirty. I think it's just something you see happen with people in the faith, and there is hope that she will return one day, but we just don't know. It's left open ended. So that's the way I took it.
Sure. Well, and I do think, if I'm remembering, I think we did talk about this a little bit on the last episode.
Yep.
Where, and I just, to me, this is it's so. To me, it's obvious and right. It might just be my perception, but at the very beginning of the first book, the first of the publications of Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, there's an excerpt where Lewis writes to his niece, and the whole dialogue to me is exactly what Lewis would be saying to Susan if Susan were a real person, if he was able to actually appeal to her fourth wall break into the story. and it's something to the effect of, you're too old for fairy tales anymore, but one day you will be old enough for them again, and then you're going to pull this book down and read and remember. And to me, that the appeal that he's making is meant for us to see that, just like you were saying, Aaron, that Susan is not lost in terms of like permanently, but she's in a place where she needs to return to the story. She needs to come back to the truth. And she's in a place where her being an adult, so to speak, is like impeding her ability to have, faith like a child, or having that childlike faith. And that there is an ability through growth and maturity to overcome even outgrowing so-called fables or fairy tales, which kind of lends itself back to what Jesus is talking about in the Gospels, where he says that you need to have a faith like a child, faith like one of these little ones. And that faith doesn't mean that a person is not mature or grown up. It means that they have the ability to accept by faith what they cannot, they can't see, right? We have to believe. And so all that seems wrapped up in what Lewis is communicating about Susan. Is it's kind of like it's a fourth wall break, where he's kind of looking at the reader and saying, do you fall into the same boat? Are you in that place where you can't receive fairy tales yet, but maybe one day you will? And when you can do that, this book will be waiting for you. And you can pull it back off the shelf and you can read it and you can remember Narnia and remember that this is all true. Yeah. So, yeah.
That's actually, that's what I've been saying about this year for me specifically, because I recently refound, like, as we're rereading these, and I refound that quote. For me, 2024 is the year that I'm old enough for fairy tales again. Is what I've been saying.
I like that.
So no, this is, and it all stems from our conversations, because I've never read Lord of the Rings. I just got my brother The Hobbit, which means I get to read it.
Okay. Okay.
Then my brother got me Stardust, which is a movie that I love, but I've never read the book. So this is for me. This is the year that I'm old enough for fairy tales again. So that's probably, out of any quote of C.S. Lewis, that's probably my favorite quote.
Yeah,
because I think that's, and especially because it's to his niece. It's one that's, I'm not going to say it's kind of the most real, because it's one that it has nothing to do with a letter that he is writing as far as, here's a lesson to be learned. No, this is just something that he's saying to a family member that he cares about. So it's very real.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Tripping Orc in the comments is saying C.S. Lewis lost his faith and got religious again in his 30s. Susan kind of represents what he went through.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It was, if I recall, I believe it was actually Tolkien that brought him back. If I am remembering correctly,
I believe so. Tolkien led him to the Lord to begin with, and was a strong influence on Lewis through their whole careers, or through their time together. And in fact, it seems to be the case that a lot of the same influences were present, like the one ring and then the two rings, the green and yellow at the beginning of, Magician's Nephew. So all that imagery and those influences seem to be very strong and akin to one another because of how closely they walked together and how similarly they thought in terms of both writing and rhetoric and theology and philosophy and all those things.
So getting back to the story,
yes,
they call for help. So Eustace and Jill show up, and they said that they were on a train. They felt a jolt. Next thing you know, they're in Narnia.
Yep.
And So they start helping King Tyrion and Jewel. They free. They figure out that the fake Aslan is a donkey, and they free him.
Yeah.
So now he joins their group.
Yeah.
Which is
And
the what's the what's um the quote? It's not a quote, but it's just a saying, like the donkey in the lion's clothing, I think is what it is.
it's a fable. I was reading about that today. There's a classic fable where a donkey. It's called like the ass and the lion, where
Oh, right.
he finds the lion's skin, and he fools everybody except for the fox, because the donkey braids like a donkey, and the fox is like, "You can't fool me. I know you're still a donkey."
A donkey. Yeah.
But yeah, so there's this stable that the fake Aslan has been making appearances and they do the appearances at night, so they can't get a good look at him.
Yeah.
So that's where all the animals are gathered, and I know Caleb told me how to say it. I've already forgot I keep saying Calormen are also gathered there,
Uh-huh.
and they start claiming that their god, what's their god?
Tash.
Yeah, the Tash is inside the stable.
Mhm.
If you go inside, that he will kill you. And we discovered there's actually is a Tash heading that way
Mhm.
as we are reading the story. Things get wildly out of control. There is one of the, I'm gonna keep calling him Calorie Man, but I know that's not what you said.
Yeah.
One of them is named Emeth, and he wants to see his god, so he's demanding to go into the stable.
Yeah.
And you find out that there's just a guy inside the stable that's been killing people or killing whatever when they go in there. And then we don't see Emmet for a while after this. He goes in the stable. He's not seen again. We will see him again later.
I definitely want to talk about that because
yes,
it's very interesting, and I don't know how to take it.
Yeah, we'll talk about Emmet here in a minute, but you start seeing like it seems like, oh, the bad guys got Jill. Oh, they took out Eustace. It's like everybody's falling in battle, and as they go into the stable, suddenly they're not in the stable anymore. They're like in a field. Or like I think there was a doorway to this field inside there, and they start finding themselves in the land of Aslan.
Yes.
And Tash is actually in the stable at one point, and then I think Aslan banishes him. I can't remember, but so yeah, we see the land of Aslan, and then we start seeing all of our old friends again. Peter, everybody's there except for Susan. Right. Everybody's there, and we find out that there was a train accident. And they all died on the train. So this is their heaven, and the Bible talks about a new heaven, a new earth. So we're seeing that this is a new Narnia that's being created.
Yeah.
So getting back to Caleb's question, Emeth is there, a worshiper of
Tash.
Tash.
Right.
And Aslan says something along the effects of, well, since he had pure faith, that faith is a good thing, and since Tash was evil, the good can only be towards Aslan. Something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but it was like, since he was such a good servant, then he was actually worshiping me, not Tash, and so he can be here. And it's very confusing. So what's your take on this, Daniel? Because me and Caleb are confused.
Sure, yeah. So there's a book, looking this up right now, and I'm probably not going to do the explanation justice, but it's called From A to Z to Narnia with C.S. Lewis by Louis Marcos. And he takes each letter, right? A for Aslan and for Narnia, and he goes through explaining different things, and one of them is T, which he gives to or E for Emmett, and he deals with this question of like what's going on in the text, and it seems to be the case. Probably the more orthodox answer. Well, we'll start with the detractors. A lot of people who read this take it as a nod that Lewis was a universalist, that he was giving credence to a universalist theology, right? That everyone who, like, all roads lead to God, everything is ultimately okay. As long as it's good in some sort of nebulous, ambiguous way, it's okay. Evil is evil, good is good. So, Emmett was a good guy. He was a little confused, but it's okay in the end. The take that Louis Marcos goes with is that this is an example of the Lord's final appeal to people in death. And in sort of a similar experience to Paul when he's blinded by the Lord on the road to Damascus, and Paul bows and responds to Jesus by saying, "Who are you, Lord?" Right, of his own free will. And if I'm not mistaken, Emmett refers to Aslan as Lord in the exchange, or king or sovereign. He gives him some sort of a worshipful title. So it's this idea that Emmett is not there because of his obedience to Tash, which Aslan then interpreted. It was that he was seeking after what was true and didn't have access to the truth. But now that he is presented with Aslan in truth, he receives Aslan and believes in him. Now, again, like I said, I'm probably not doing the explanation justice, and I encourage everyone listening to go and get a copy of the book, because it's really well done in terms of what he's trying to communicate, and it's also great Narnia material anyway. It's good just for people that like Narnia. I don't know if that explanation does as much justice as you would like. It seems to be the case that you can make arguments for appeals from God, in death, we could say, right? There's people, theologians argue about a person's ability to consciously repent before the final judgment. People that are in states that can't respond, people that are, in a vegetative state or brain dead or things like this, like, what is the case for their soul? And I think it may be the case that was partly what Lewis was getting at. But I think it's also wrapped up in this idea that Lewis really did see things in a not a dualistic, I don't think that's the right way of saying it, but kind of a dichotomist fashion, that to follow evil, to follow Tash, to follow Satan, in effect, is to do that which is the opposite of faith, because faith, by virtue of Scripture, is a biblical or a God-centered quality. That's a divine attribute. It's not something that can truly be. Someone cannot truly say that they are having faith in Satan. They can say that they're following the devil, but they can't truly say it, because faith is something that comes from God. So it's kind of this, like, similar to, I think, what's going on in Mere Christianity, where Lewis is trying to, like, skirt the line between Protestant, Orthodox, Catholic traditions about various topics. And he's, like he says in the beginning of Mere Christianity, I'm not here to argue as a theologian. I'm not here to argue as one with authority on what people should believe about the Eucharist or about baptism or about the cross, all those things. I'm just talking about mere Christianity, the basic principle of what it means to be a believer. I think this is one of Lewis's areas where he tried to dabble in some more complicated theology and kind of give a homage to an idea that it is something that challenges people in faith when it comes to not having certainty on a family member or someone that don't know if they're saved or not. And I think he was trying to give the hope and encouragement that the real issue is a person's decision whether or not to follow the Lord. It's not necessarily how they lived their life, but it's what they do with Jesus when they're confronted with him, which seems to be what's going on with Emmett. Again, like I said, I don't know how fulfilling or satisfying that explanation is for most. And
Could
I think,
it
go ahead.
could it be that what he's saying is that Emmett is living in a land that has never heard of Aslan? He knows that there's a higher power. He
Right,
just doesn't
right,
know what that higher power is. He thinks it may be
right,
Tash, but
right,
he is serving that higher power. He just doesn't know the
right.
name of it, and
Yeah,
so I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Hard to say.
There's a passage in Romans, without trying to give too much credence to this, because I do think this is one of those gray areas when it comes to fantasy literature. We just got to kind of take with salt, because
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Lewis isn't making an argument, on what we should believe. He's creating a story and a narrative that reflects some things that he may or may not have believed, things that he was wrestling with, things he wanted to articulate in literature. But there's a passage in Romans which talks about the Gentiles who are, by virtue of their conscience, they're a law unto themselves, even though they themselves were not given the law at Sinai. So Paul, he makes a delineation between the Jewish community who received the law at Sinai in the Old Testament and had the commandments, and the Goyim, or the Gentile, the non-Jewish nations who didn't have that law, but because they are moved by conscience of the idea that there is such a thing as right and wrong, which of course comes from God, that they are a law unto themselves, that they live out the same kind of practice of an observant Jew, in the sense that they are doing what is right because they're convicted in their hearts what is right. And that man himself is revealed in his heart, that there is a God, that there is truth, that there is right and wrong, we can say, that that people have to make a decision about. They have to decide whether to accept good and reject evil, or to accept evil and reject good. So I think all of that's tied up in what we're talking about with Emmett. And it probably could have been stated or written a lot better or more clearly. But at the bare minimum, I think Lewis wants to provoke the person who's reading to think about categories that don't fit neatly and nicely into their theology.
Yeah. And if it was written neatly and nicely, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So there we have it. You get the bookends of Narnia. You get the creation. You get the destruction.
Yeah.
And he kind of covers it all. I really enjoyed reading these books. It's still, like I said, recency bias. I need to kind of sit and think about what I've read, and maybe come back to it in a year and see how I feel about it then. But these were really, I can see why they are timeless classics.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to mention, because you sent us some stuff that you wanted to talk about. One of the topics was reading as a kid versus as an adult. What did you mean by that?
I kind of mentioned it earlier. I didn't really care about the kids' adventure so much. Like, I didn't really get caught up in, oh, the kids are becoming kings. Oh, wow, they're royal. Oh, this, that. I'm a cranky old adult. I'm just like, I was like, okay, yeah, I just want to learn more about the world and, the big battles and,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get caught up in the whole, if you're reading this as a kid, you're like, oh, wow, I could be a king one day, or I could go on these adventures and stuff,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Tripping Orc is asking, how long did it take you to figure out they were dead? I think I had gotten spoiled on that somewhere, like years ago. I had read something about Susan had been done dirty and there was some type of accident. I couldn't quite remember the details. So I think I had read that somewhere previously. But once they started talking about a train and a jolt, I was like, oh yeah, they were they're dead. So yeah, and it's interesting how imagery from this book you'll see pop up in other places in pop culture, like this the stable that they enter and they're entering into heaven. Lost had a very similar ending where there's this church, this like building, and they're all entering from the I guess you could consider it purgatory. They're all entering into the afterlife at the end. Very similar imagery, and I'm sure they were basing that loosely on some of this Narnia imagery. So yeah. Any other comments?
I just wanted to make one more comment to sort of cement why I enjoy The Horse and His Boy so much, is because of its connection to the last battle. So I remember as a kid reading through the book, and it was very, the witches on the bad side sort of permeate the stories, not just in terms of the White Witch and the Green Witch, but also just, sorcery and witches and ghouls and goblins throughout the book, starting with Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, where you see the army, which is comprised of ghouls and goblins and all that. And then going forward with that still permeating in Prince Caspian with the, hey, let's have a ritual and bring the White Witch back to life and all this. And so that kind of gets the attention, I think, from the reading audience as like the main source of villainy and evil in the Narnia world. But when you read through Horse and His Boy, as Shasta and Arvis and the horses are going through Tushban, they pass by the temple of the god Tash. And I remember reading that and just kind of being like, oh, there's this other thing that's going on in the background that I wasn't aware of. That like it's okay, Aslan and the witch, and you kind of like, right, the hero and the villain. But then over here in this other country, they've got a god that they worship. And it seems when you're reading through the story, just kind of this novelty, like, oh yeah, it's a pagan culture. They have deities like the Greeks had, or Romans, or Egyptians, or whatever. But then when you get to the last battle, it's not the witch that reappears. It's Tash who comes back. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, rightfully so, should cause the reader to shift their perspective, where they're like, wait a second, I thought the witch was the big, bad, evil villain, but it's actually Tash. And Tash actually manifests. They see, the first thing that you see in the beginning of the story is his ghost, or his spirit, moving over Narnia. This sort of like real, like spooky, demonic type with all of his multiple arms. And then eventually at the very end of the story, he actually manifests inside of the shed and actually kills, like takes one of the Calormans with him into his world, his realm, wherever he is. And a lot of this perspective I'm getting, the people that the guy who actually went through it, I mentioned his podcast last time, Through the Wardrobe, I think.
I've been listening to him.
Yes. So he has a 2-part episode where he deals with the character of Tash and then like the origin. And he makes a really spectacular argument that Tash as an entity may have actually originated in Charn and is actually connected with the witch and is actually the power behind the White Witch, which is why Lewis doesn't have the witch reappear at the end, but has Tash show up at the end as the big baddie. And so I think it's just a really, I think, important, it's an important literary connection, showing that Lewis was setting things up, even in Horse and His Boy, for this final conflict that he had planned in the end, that he was dropping, Easter eggs, so to speak, all the way through to make a consistent and a coherent story connection, but then also for the reader to be challenged in maybe their perspectives or their ideas, that they kind of think they have the story figured out and they know who the players are. And then there's this kind of like, not gotcha moment, but it almost like that at the very end of the story where it's like, I did not see that coming. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciated that in terms of Lewis trying to keep things fresh and unexpected. Similar, I mean, even the way the story begins, like Aaron was saying, with Shift and Puzzle, right? This really bizarre, daring duo. It's like, what is going on here, right? I've been reading about kids going on, and now there's a monkey and a donkey, and there's a dead lion carcass, like that. That's weird. So to me, it really was perfect. It was well put together with that sort of looking forward on Lewis's part of wanting to complete the story with, I think, probably the most Judeo-Christian picture he could, with this last battle, Antichrist versus the true Christ, the true Messiah, and then the power behind the evil that we've been seeing manifesting in front of us in a way that is surprising, scary, and then also relieving when Aslan shows up and permanently gets rid of that evil and then remakes everything. So, yeah, just wanted to put that in there.
Cool stuff. So this was our book club for this month of Narnia. We're trying to do book club the first week of every month. So next month we're gonna have an interesting show. In the Bible, it says there's nothing new under the sun, and we are going to be discussing that, how a lot of your pop culture is based on stuff in the Bible. So a lot of your movies, the themes. We've got a lot of surprising ones that you won't believe that Daniel has told me about in the past. I've got some that I know about. I don't know if you've ever seen Poseidon Adventure, but that has biblical themes everywhere. So we will be doing that on, I think, February 4th.
Okay.
Is the date of that show. That one's going to be real exciting. Next week, we are going to be looking forward to 2024. We'll probably look at the first half of the schedule for what movies are coming out, and just discussing which movies look interesting, which ones we're excited about. And it's going to be a different year than normal for movies. Not too many superhero movies coming out. So we'll see what that all looks like. And I'm not sure where Caleb got off to. Oh, there he is. He's back.
I have no idea what just happened. It was like Opera. I run Opera GX, like every other gamer, and it said Opera ran out of memory, which I don't know what that means. So I just had to close everything.
Okay. I was just going over the schedule. Next week will be our big movie show, and then next book club will be February 4th. We'll be discussing the Bible and pop culture.
Cool.
And if you want to get a jump start in March, we will be discussing Astro City Metro Book Volume 1. Which I'm going to order this week, and then if Daniel wants to borrow it, he can read it before that show.
Sure.
And
I love that.
So I was about to say, because I was like, have you ordered it yet? Because you got it for me first, and then
I've read it like 20 years ago. I just need a refresher. But yeah, Astro City is great, but we'll deal with that in March when we get there. So I think that's our show for the night. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want to share your favorite Narnia moments, please post down below in the comments. And please share this live stream. Hit that like button. We're trying to grow this audience. And until then, I've been Final Monkey.
And I'm Caleb.
Daniel. We will catch you next time in the Shark Pond.
See y'all.
See you.